So, the F-20 Tiger Shark. It's the first rank 8 premium jet that has made it into War Thunder, and today we're going to be taking a look at how well it does in the simulator game mode. Now this is a $75 premium, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the most expensive premium plane, most expensive premium vehicle that we have in the game right now. Also, I didn't buy this, Gaijin gave me a test drive for this, and I've been playing around with it for about 2 weeks now. I wanted to give myself a little bit more time with this aircraft just because I really wanted to gather my thoughts and give you guys like a really honest review on this. I also wanted, because Gaijin gave me a test drive for this, I wanted to sort of, give you a positive review on the plane, tell you that it's worth the money, it's amazing, this is a really good aircraft for grinding and stuff like that. But in all honesty, I can't really say I enjoyed my time with this plane. Now, before I start my whinging about this aircraft, as I usually do in most of my videos, I do want to mention a few of the positives on this plane, because it isn't just all negatives. What you get for your $75 is an aircraft that has an incredibly nice external model. This is just a really good looking plane. The paint jobs are quite nice. It gets a really nice cockpit as well. It's very functional. The HUD's nice and big. You get an RWR display. You get a radar display, and on the secondary MFD you get a map, which I think you can also switch over to like engine RPM and stuff like that. I really love it when the model makers, the artists or whatever, they put a lot of work and detail and effort into their cockpits, especially for us sim guys. It just makes us feel a little bit more appreciated, I guess. Just the entire cockpit in general really reminds me of the F-18 cockpit as well, which shouldn't really be that surprising, because as far as I know in real life, the F-20 and the F-18 kind of got developed alongside each other, albeit for slightly different purposes, I think. But anyway, the F-18 obviously got through, and the F-20 forever remained kind of like a prototype or something. So talking about the F-18, if it wasn't obvious enough, the F-20 is essentially this like little Frankenstein plane that where they took an F5E, they upgraded the avionics package on it, and bolted the engine out of an F-18 into the back of it. And you can kind of see, like when you look at the plane, you can tell the engine is a little bit, it does seem a little bit too big for the aircraft, and you'd think that this would translate into this thing just being an absolute rocket ship. But it really doesn't, just because the F5 airframe essentially produces quite a lot of drag. And you do notice this at the highest speeds. You do get quite a low rip speed as well compared to other planes around the 12.0 BR. At high speeds you're sort of limited by your max speed. I mean, it goes up to like Mach 1.7 or something, and then you kind of have to start slowing down. It's not really a I would say like a beyond visual range fighter. You do also only get 2 Sparrows that you can equip, and you have to sacrifice if 2 AIM-9Ls essentially per 1 Sparrow. So the weapon loadout isn't ideal for this in that case. It's just the entire thing is just designed for close quarters, right? I mean, the F5 originally, when the Americans designed it at first, it was designed to be this like light fighter that could dogfight, right? Because at the time the Americans only had the Phantom, and the Phantom was notoriously bad at turning and stuff, so they developed this like light, cheap fighter that they could also export, of course, but just so they had something that could kind of combat the MiG-21s in a dogfight. And that means it was just from the ground up, it was designed for this, for dogfighting, and that worked quite well in the 1960s. However, where are we at in War Thunder? We're like in the, I would say like the 80s, 90s kind of, when you look at top tier. When you go up against flankers and MiG-29s and stuff, it's sort of, I mean, you get the more powerful engine, but you do notice the shortcomings of the airframe itself. You produce a lot of drag. You're not amazing at pulling AOA or anything like that, and even though you do get a powerful engine, you don't have the oomph to sort of just burn through like the slow speed AOA and stuff that some of the planes like the F-16 can kind of do. So in other words, once you get slow, it can be quite difficult to sort of pick speed back up, and that can be a very difficult, very dangerous thing to sort of, a dangerous situation to get into, especially when you're fighting some of the Russian planes with super high AOA capabilities like the Flanker with the R-73s. It really is exactly like the F5E in that case, except now your opponents are a lot more capable. And this kind of leads me to my next point, where this is where I think the real problem with this plane sort of comes in the sim game mode, and that is that this is a 12.0 aircraft, and if you judge it as a 12.0 aircraft, it's not terrible. When you start comparing it to F-16As and MiG-29, 913s or whatever, it doesn't come up that short, and it's not amazing. I mean, it's essentially, this plane is just a slightly worse version of the F-16A in basically every metric. And when you're dogfighting, you kind of have to fly it the same way like you would an F-16. It's just, it's slightly worse at doing the things that the F-16 does. So that's kind of essentially how you have to fly it. But as far as the 12.0 goes, you know, and it is also a premium, this is, I think it is fairly balanced at the 12.0 battle rating. The problem is with the way the matchmaker works in Sim, is that 12.0 at the moment it just constantly gets up tiered to 12.7 every single match. There isn't a single possibility that your 12.0 plane is going to get down tiered to something like 11.7 even, right? And that's just a kind. This may change in the future. It probably will change in the future once we get higher battle ratings. But at the moment, because of BR compression, this is just sort of where we're sitting at. And that is the main issue that this plane sort of runs into. So you have a 12.0 plane that you now have to compare up against 12.7s with missiles that have IRCCMC, because in this thing obviously only is limited to AIM-9Ls, which don't get any form of IRCCM. AIM-9Ls at the moment are ridiculously easy to defeat. In most cases you dump like a single flare and the missile just goes for the flare. If it's anything other than perfectly rear aspect and the guy has his afterburner on, the missile's just going to go for the flares like basically every single time. And the problems that this sort of leads to is that you're not able to take out the person before the merge, reliably at least. So in a lot of cases, you get to the merge, and then because as long as the guy's looking at you and has his finger on the flare button, your AIM-9Ls aren't really gonna catch them. So you're forced into a gunfight every time. This takes time. Now, it is, like I said, this plane is more skill dependent than that of the F-16. You can still outrate Russian planes, like you can outrate the flanker and stuff like that, but that is sort of, once you start playing maps like Afghanistan, Rocky Canyon, where you're generally fighting up at higher altitudes, that job becomes a lot more difficult. It's like even when you just go up to about 8,000 feet or something, right, in the mountains somewhere, which isn't that ridiculously high, you immediately notice the difference. You just don't have the power to sort of just power your way through these turns like the F-16 has, and you need to be really careful with the amount of AOA you pull and the amount of Gs and stuff. It can be a very tricky and frustrating plane to fly, and then obviously there's the problem of third partying and stuff like that. With the RSCCM missiles, you also only get 45 flares. Now they are single pops, and the flares, even though they're small caliber flares, because of the low heat signature that the F-18 engine gives off in War Thunder, I mean the Gripen has the same problem as well. The flares become quite effective because the engine has such a low heat signature, so even though you only get 45 flares, because of the low heat signature, they do kind of have the same effectiveness as large caliber ones on other planes. Another thing I want to mention with this plane as well is, and this is specifically pertaining to Sim as well, is that the subject of endurance. This plane doesn't get a lot of fuel. In total you get 28 minutes of fuel. Obviously on afterburner that will be reduced like in any other plane. The reason I mention this is I think in RB this isn't that big of a deal, because RB matches are generally over pretty quick, but Sim matches, specifically in the Sim game mode, I mean you can see here in the gameplay I'm playing on Tunisia and the action's like pretty fast paced and whatever. And on these smaller maps it's not really that big of an issue, but when you start playing stuff like Afghanistan, or Denmark or whatever, where you do generally have quite long distances that you need to cover in order to get to the action, and then if you're also in a match that isn't, a lobby that isn't completely full, or the enemy team only has like 5 or 6 players on it, which is actually quite common for top tier and Sim as well, especially if you're fighting on the blue team against the red team, the Russians and stuff, because blue team generally always has a numbers advantage and there aren't that many red side players and whatever. So you do spend a lot of your time just looking for enemies, just in general when you're flying on the American team. However, when your plane doesn't have that much fuel in it, that could be a little bit sort of taxing in the long run. It can get quite annoying because the cruise speed isn't that incredibly high, and what I mean by that is just just on 100% throttle or whatever. So you do kind of, which means you're not going anywhere particularly fast until you activate the afterburner, but then you go through all of your fuel, right? And it's currently the F-20 doesn't get any drop tanks either, which also brings me to the next issue, and that is the weight that the fuel has. 28 minutes of fuel doesn't last you that long, but it makes a huge difference in weight of the aircraft. So I don't know, say you take off with 28 minutes of fuel, 4 minutes later on 24 minutes of fuel, you find yourself in a merge with a flanker, right? And you'll notice very quickly that your energy retention just isn't the same. This plane is very fuel dependent, so if you merge with anything above 20 minutes of fuel, ideally you want to be at around 15 minutes. You do find yourself struggling, and in a plane where the missiles aren't very reliable and you sort of have to rely on these gun kills, which the guns aren't amazing on this either, by the way. I know you just saw me like blow up an F-15 there in a couple shots, but the problem with them is they have quite a weird ballistics profile in the sense that it can be quite hard to sort of lead them, and that F-15 obviously just kind of stalled out in front of me, so it was an easy shot in that case. Back to the fuel issue though, like it will get quite annoying to constantly have to perfectly judge your fuel load, like basically every single time. Which is obviously impossible to do, which means a lot of the time you are just going to get caught with your dick out, and you're not going to have any other choice but to just run straight at the guy with that shit dangling in between your legs and hope for the best, right? The problem is though, if you're lucky, yeah, he's going to run away screaming and then problem solved, but if not, he's going to get his scissors out and now you've got that to worry about. And I know this is a bit of a childish metaphor, but this is kind of what it feels like to play this plane. You hope that the other guy doesn't really know your weakness and that the other guy doesn't really know what he's doing in this plane, because if he does, it is so easy to mess up in this aircraft. And you're just not really gonna you're not gonna stand much of a chance, and especially if there's like multiple people there, it's so impossible to deal with multiple opponents at once because your missiles are so easily countered, and you don't have the flare capacity. Even if they are single pops, you just don't have the amount of flares to sort of just keep countering missiles that have IRCCM capability. So you really just start the match at a disadvantage. And you could definitely make an argument that this is kind of where premium planes should be, right? Just sit slightly below the meta and then have your personal skill kind of make up the difference, right? The problem is though that with more, the modern IRCCM missiles are getting like generally harder and harder to counter anyway. It's becoming increasingly difficult to sort of make up that gap just on skill alone, and it's becoming a lot more about what kind of resources your plane has, right? So it's not like like some sort of like premium P-47 or something that you just have to, just boom and zoom, bro, or whatever. You can't just translate that into jets, essentially, right? It's all about what kind of resources your aircraft has now, and unfortunately, the F-20 just doesn't have that many. Now, as the video is coming to a close here, I kind of just want to go over the value for money kind of side of things here. If you couldn't have guessed already, I don't think this thing is worth $75. If you are desperately looking for an aircraft or for a top tier jet to grind through the entire US tech tree, I would highly recommend the F5C. It is a little bit cheaper as well. It sits at a lower battle rating, but because it's ranked 7, you can still research basically any plane in the tree. So you can research your F-15, your F-16, your F-14, whatever. But because it sits at 10.3, the matchmaker is just way better. There's also more games done at that battle rating. You also get bombs as well, which this one does get as well. You can, it doesn't get a huge bomb load, the F-20, but it gets enough to take out at least one base. So you can do that as well if you want to. The F5C, however, though, you fly it relatively the same way you fly the F-20. It's just that your opponents aren't as capable. So that's something as well. If you are just interested in bombing, the F4S is obviously kind of good. I just wouldn't necessarily take it or treat it as an air-to-air platform, at least in sim. It's just the Phantoms just don't do that well in sim. I mean, they might do in RB, but in sim they just kind of lack the like the situational awareness a lot of the times. If you don't really care about any tech tree in particular, and you just want a good top-tier premium jet to just grind SL in or whatever, I would say the MiG-23 ML in the Russian tech tree is still probably the best value for money. I'd say, at least as far as like air-to-air combat goes. That thing is just, I mean, it's essentially an 11.3, 11.7 plane sitting down at 11.0 with amazing missiles for the battle rating, and I'd say it's probably still the best jet premium out there. Also, I forgot to mention this as well, but before the video ends, if you do end up spending a whole $75 on this plane, make sure you have enough SL to buy the expert crew mod for this as well, because you will need the extra G tolerance on this plane. Anyway, at the end of that match, my final score was 18-6 with 2 of those like severe damage assists or whatever you call them. Don't pay too much attention to how much SL and RP I made here, because I'm pretty sure when Gaijin give out rentals for premiums, they basically just have the regular tech tree modifiers. So yeah, if you guys are looking for a sim-orientated Discord server, my one is obviously linked in the description. Every now and then I'll hop in there as well, and we have like a night of gaming or whatever. It's actually kind of fun. But yeah, other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will hope to see you in the next video. Cheers.